Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of HR Tech Chat. And with us today is somebody that I was introduced to very recently, but I feel like we should have known each other for a long time in this space. It's Brenda Laughlin. Brenda is, sorry, Brenda is CEO and principal consultant of PeakSource Consulting and also co-founder and managing partner of Enavrio. And she has quite a bit of expertise and quite a bit of experience and background in the HCM space, and especially in data privacy and security and some of the rules and regulations around that. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. Welcome, Brenda.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So, and I think this is a really current, timely, very
absolutely.
apt conversation for us to be having. There's so many rules and regulations around the handling of employees' data and this sort of thing, and there's so many things to bear in mind and to be aware of in handling it, especially in implementations and all sorts of things. And I know you have a lot of background around this, and maybe that would be a good place to start. Just could you share with our viewers your background in the HCM space, because you have a very interesting sort of broad background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career as an HR practitioner for years and years and worked in all the different areas of HR, and then decided to make the switch into HR technology and consulting. And for years was at Success Factors, and then worked with a partner leading their part of their practice. And about 3 years ago, I went on my own to really dive in more to consulting, and have had my own practice for 3 years. Just recently started Enavrio with Brian Turk, and we are really focused on really HCM services, helping people operationalize data privacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Data privacy, huge deal. Where to start? I mean, what should, I mean, if you were to speak with an organization, have like a first conversation with an organization to sort of, prompt them or can persuade them that the privacy of their employees' data is really important. Like, how would you go about doing that? What are some of the things that they should be aware of that they may not be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think many organizations today are not keened into data privacy, and there's so many laws coming at us around data privacy that it's super important that we really are in tune with those laws. And it's so complex to keep up with. We have GDPR, which I think a lot of organizations are aware of, but they're very focused on their customer data. We have now in the US, we have the California law, we have the Virginia law, the Colorado law. There's laws throughout the world, and there's so much to keep up with and know how to comply. Yet I think most companies are so focused on their customers. And really, when we think about the amount of data that we have a ton of data on our employees, we have data on our candidates. I think about the number of people that apply for a single job. And so the number of the amount of data that you have on a candidate and your candidate base is even exponentially bigger than your employee base. And then we have our other workers. And so just thinking about how much risk there is around that from a compliance perspective, from a potential for data breach. None of us want to be in the headlines or having to explain why we had a data breach. It's not good. It's just not good publicity. It's not good for our reputation. And so, we really start talking a lot. I think there's a lot of awareness. Now, certainly companies that have been working in Europe around GDPR, they understand it because you're getting some requests for information which is a requirement of GDPR. You may have a data privacy officer telling you you need to look at your data privacy within your company. But certainly, I think there's going to be a growing, expanding requirement for, especially in the US, where we maybe haven't been as focused on it as they have in Europe and some of the other countries. So
that's interesting. One thing you brought up that I'd love to explore all of that, but one thing, frankly, we have only a certain amount of time on the podcast, so maybe we'll have another one of these. But
yeah.
One thing that's really interesting to me, or that intriguing, is that, yeah, talent acquisition.
Yes.
The recruiting stage, all of that data.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of things. So first of all, as you said, there's more data there, really, when you think about it, than there is, once they become employees from a certain standpoint. There's all sorts of more. There's each employee has a larger data file probably once they become an employee. But in terms of just discrete instances of data per individual, there's more in talent acquisition. So now, can we talk a little bit about, like, what are some of the rules around the handling of candidate data? Like, some of the actual laws that you need to follow, and some of the implications. And then maybe the second part of it is, what are some of the best practices around, once a person is hired, getting that data, for that person into the employee system? Like, there must be some rules around that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about our candidate data, like I said, we have so much data, and the candidates have a right with GDPR, which is European, EU, Nordics. They have the right to know what data you're collecting on them and why you're collecting that data. And they have the right to ask for that data, and they have the right to ask for that data to be erased. So you, as an employer, need to make sure that every piece of data that you're collecting on the candidate, you really have a business, like a legitimate business reason to collect it. So to be very thoughtful about, why am I actually collecting this data on the candidate? And then ensuring that as you're collecting that data, that you're only keeping it for the amount of time that you need to keep it. And so knowing what the retention requirements are and balancing that with the candidate being able to ask for the data to be erased, and being able to explain to the candidate, if they ask, why you're collecting it in the first place. And so those are some of the basic. It goes into, there's a lot more around, candidates can object to automated processing, which, is some of the things that are coming up right now, very popular within the talent acquisition space, is some of our our AI, and some of that making automated decision making. They have the right to object to that as well. But just being sure that where all your candidate data is. Did it go to any third parties? What are we collecting? And being able to erase it when and if you need to, and then putting in place and things to make sure that you are actually erasing it after the retention timeframes is key.
Let's sit on that for a minute, because I have a couple questions. So, I mean, this is a potentially like a huge, how you put it? That must be a better word than complication.
It's complex.
It's very complex. I mean, this is a potentially just a very sort of circuitous process, or very, Byzantine path to get rid of this data, or to. So what I'm getting at is, seems to me that the technology you have in place that's housing that data really needs to be top notch, or that data really needs to be readily available to you. I can imagine an organization, maybe a global organization, that's scrambling to go. You have one system that's in say Sweden, and another one that's in I almost said Finland, but they're right next to each other. Germany or something like that, right? You're in more than one area of Europe, right? And you have two different systems for, if you're a global organization, for talent acquisition. I mean, what do you advise companies like, well, let's put it differently. What's a particularly challenging uh, technological infrastructure that you've seen out there in the wild where you really had to help this company figure out, and what did you do to figure out, help them sort of figure out how to simplify, streamline their data housing or I'm saying housing. There's probably some, you know what I mean? Like, so that their data is really readily available to them so that when any one individual says, hey, no, I don't want you doing that with this, that they can go right in there, snatch it out, and stop doing that right away. Because I imagine that
Yeah.
to compliance. Like if you, there's probably some leeway in terms of how much time you have to respond, but just knowing like some of, I mean, I've seen some terrible, I've heard about some terrible technology deployments, you know, some old ones that they're just so. Sorry, I'm going on and on, but maybe you could speak to.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it all starts with the vendor functionality, right? All of our systems, there are homegrown systems out there, right? And there are people that still are using homegrown systems, companies that are, but in general, as we're working with our vendors, it's critical. And we work with HR tech vendors to ensure that they have the right functionality in place to ensure that they can comply, that they can run a report to show what all the data is that they have that's contained in their system, that they have the right purge and retention functionality put in place to ensure that it allows you to keep data for the right amount of time, to be able to erase certain data in amount of time. So we worked with companies to help them really look at their functionality if need be. But as you're an organization and you're looking at new technology, it's key that you are looking to ensure that that system, your main recruiting system, does have that functionality. And then it gets more complex as we look at other vendor systems. So we have an ATS system, but we send it, you know, we work with maybe an assessment vendor and the data goes there. So how are we building our integrations to this assessment vendor? What is the contract with the assessment vendor around how they're going to manage the data? And how do we work with them to get that data if we need to comply with a access request from an individual? How do we erase that data if we have to erase it? And so those complications is where it comes in. So companies that are global, and I worked particularly with one really, really large global company for many years. It is really identifying and minimizing those country-specific systems and making sure that those integrations, that data mapping is really tight to know where that data goes and how it's being controlled.
So, you know, I guess my question is, so I see a parallel here, you know, when you're a global organization, you know, let's say global payroll, for instance, you may have a different type of solution in almost every region or locale where you have a presence, right? And global payroll can really sneak up on an organization, become very difficult to manage. All of a sudden, it's almost always a reaction. Oh, I guess we need a global payroll solution now because we're dealing with this just monster every week or 2 weeks, and we're barely making payroll processing happen. So thinking about it so what you mentioned was that you try to sort of streamline that for an organization to have as few different disparate solutions as possible in place. What are some of the challenges around making that happen for an organization? I mean, that to me seems like a monumental task.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think when you are looking at global payroll, the challenge with global payroll is a couple of things. One is the hosting of the data. So many places from a data privacy, several countries require you to have local hosting of that data. So that's a challenge, and many vendors are not able to do that. Some have like a Russian local solution where you can host the data there, but yet it does come into the main system. So that is a challenge we work with, and sometimes you can't work around going to more of a streamlined system. When you have more disparate systems, it's harder to track where the data is at, but the complexity of going to one system is this hosting piece. And then also the access, right? The more people you have in the system in different countries, then you have to, it's more critical that we have the proper access controls in place, that we have whatever permissions set up so that only the people who need to see the data can actually see the data.
Are there any, sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, because you got me thinking, are there any organizations or vendors or technology vendors out there that you can sort of, maybe technology/service vendor, where you can outsource your data protection, data privacy to? Okay.
There are, I mean, there are different components to data privacy. There are organizations that you can outsource your like compliance types of functionalities, where if I have a data breach, how do I handle that? All systems require GDPR and many of the other laws require that we do privacy impact assessments. There are companies that handle the privacy impact assessments. There are also software vendors that can help you with data mapping, with data inventories. There are solutions out there. And so there's a variety of different solutions. There's not one organization that I found that really focuses on solving all that for a company, or solving all the workforce data privacy pieces. So that's really why we've kind of jumped into it, because we kind of saw a gap in the workforce data privacy piece.
Yeah. It is a big sort of gap there. I mean, if you can't kind of outsource that whole thing to one provider, then it seems to me that it's potentially very, very just wrought with pitfalls, possibly fraught with pitfalls.
Yeah, it's such a complex, I mean, it's such a complex thing. You know, you think about the legal piece and the security and the data management, and there's just so many layers to it. I think that's why we will see. I mean, I'm not aware of any organization. There may be somebody out there that can do it all. Maybe.
I wanted to, if we could just get into what is the worst case scenario for an organization? You know, there's all sorts of potential downsides to this, right? You're going to have a legal issue, right? Potential litigation against your organization if you fail to protect this data in the correct ways according to the law, or even just in ways that employees might simply expect you to, even if it's not necessarily codified in the regulatory environment, right? So there's that, and then there's there's sort of the hard costs associated with responding to, say, a data breach, or to an infraction committed in the handling of the data, right? Vis-a-vis some of these laws, especially GDPR. But beyond that, so there's that, and I'm curious what the potential, like, what are some of the fines like? Are these some sort of weighty fines?
Yeah, they're huge. Some of them, there's so many different laws that and in some cases we are just waiting to see when they're actually going to start enforcing it. There are some grace periods right now, like the California law 2023, January, I believe it's January 1st, 2023 is when it applies to HR departments, HR data, so the employee data. We're kind of waiting to see how they're going to enforce it, what those fines are, but some of these fines are millions and millions of dollars from a GDPR or other, can be. And so the fines are gigantic. Like you said, Brent, just defending that case. Data breach costs of just containing the data, managing it. A lot of companies do have some kind of insurance policy that helps them with whatever they lost from, some type of data breach potentially. But there's still the cost of, if you have government involvement, you're trying to solve this yourself, you have the government, you have, whatever it is, trying to additionally help solve whatever breach issues you've had, reporting. And then there's just reputation, right? When we talk about, one of the big things we're talking about right now is workforce experience. And nothing can erode the workforce experience than, hey, you lost my data. Now I don't trust you to just take care of my basic data, my social security number or your national ID, my bank account information, or what about like some of my sensitive personal data, like gender identity. Some companies capture that type of stuff. So those are the basics of trust and the foundation of what we're all trying to work on, workforce experience right now. So
a potential catastrophe, right? I mean,
my goodness.
Your employer culture could be, with one mistake, if not even, just at the point of the mistake, your employer culture or employer brand takes a major blow, right? And there are potential ramifications to that. So to me, that's just one more reason to have the right system and the right technological infrastructure in place, and probably workflow as well, that you can respond to a mistake as quickly as possible to just minimize the otherwise potentially huge impact, rippling effect on your on that trust. Trust is huge in employee experience, isn't it?
It is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's just the foundation. It's the core. Like it's just an absolute, right? You have to be, it's one of those things that I think we all know that if trust is gone, so is your employee experience, employee loyalty, all of that. So
Well, you could be facing a major attrition event in the very near future, right?
Exactly.
I just want to talk about, if we can talk a little bit more about this employee data privacy, right? One of the things that I frankly like about GDPR from a philosophical standpoint is this idea that individuals have control over the data that is about them. And that to me is a or not so tacit admission that privacy matters. That privacy is a thing, that it's real and it's a legitimate desire, right? So, for instance, this is a little bit funny story, but it drives home the point. A couple weekends ago, I went with my two daughters to visit Nana and Papa. They live about an hour away, and we went for a walk up there, the road next to their road, and it's there's a farm up there, and you see some animals. It was cool, right? And we turn around, and our daughters, one is she's what, 33 months, and the other one is 15 months, going on 16 months. So anyways, so they're small. So the older one, she talks, a lot. She's like, "Oh, look at that." Like, we went by a driveway, and she said, "Oh, let's go. I want to go down that road," right? And I said, "Well, we can't." She didn't understand that there's a road and then there's a driveway that's private, right? And I said, "Well, and I was kind of tongue in cheek. I said, well, that's somebody's private driveway. That's somebody's private property, and we can't go on their private." Of course, she has no clue what I'm talking about. And then I went off on this thing where I said it is very important to protect private property rights, and all this. Then it occurred to me, this is just my weirdness. I'm a weird guy, I guess. Like walking down a country road with my daughter and Papa, and And I thought to myself, oh, that's interesting. Why should somebody's data be any different? That data should be private as well. And then I, this
What a
was,
great story and what a great analogy. Absolutely. Yeah.
so, I mean, so GDPR, that to me it's a no-brainer. And it's
Mhm.
really interesting that it's very interesting. We have to actually put these partitions in place, these legal partitions in place to make sure that people don't encroach on that. Because I guess if it weren't, pretty clear that, you can't just camp out on somebody else's lawn, people might end up just putting their tents up on their lawn. I mean, how much different would that be than just using their data and not giving them the right to have control of it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, how many of us have at some point applied for a job and you fill out data? I mean, and then you don't know what that potential employer, maybe you were rejected for the job, and then you have no idea what the employer has done with that. And you apply it a lot of places, so your data is kind of all over the place. And what GDPR did is really give, at least for Europeans, people in the EU, Nordics, et cetera, it's given the right to say, what data do you have on me? And you have to erase it. You can't just keep my data because you didn't choose me for a job. You can't just keep it. So it's great. And I do see that in the future, we're going to have more and more controls over what data, like if you have my data, do you have permission to use it? Do you not? And me being able to control and see all of that. I think transparency is going to be key, for HR tech vendors going forward as we develop new functionality systems, transparency, so that you can see what data, where it's at, know what it's all being used for, and then being able to say, no, you can't use my data that way. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. So first off, just the idea that the candidate
Mhm.
gave you his or her information for the explicit purpose, right? To apply for the job. They didn't just kind of give you, it's like me. I gave the mechanic my car for the explicit purpose of their fixing it, and I get it back after I pay them for that particular service, right? So it's not, the mechanic doesn't have my car to just kind of drive around and do errands for.
Yeah,
I'm not going to take this
exactly.
analogy too far, but right, you don't have my data to just use for whatever. It's not your data. My data is not yours, in perpetuity, because I gave it to you for this particular reason. That to me is just absolutely fundamental, and so there is that importance of being able to purge the data immediately, or as soon as possible following the end of the whatever the engagement was. One of the questions I have for you, though, is this is sort of maybe a little bit more of a philosophy kind of question, I guess, around technological infrastructure, right? But do you think that why are we having so much trouble around? Let me put this differently. We've decided, okay, we're going to have these rules in place, right? But there's still all these challenges. I mean, is there sort of do you see in the not too or maybe the distant future, or the midterm future, or whatever it is, do you see sort of a change in philosophy in terms of the philosophical sort of idea behind how we put together, how we look at data as organizations, and maybe systems being built that just look at the ownership of the data and treat the ownership of the data completely differently? Because right now, when you send your data to an organization, it is, from a practical standpoint, it's their data because it's in their system. It's kind of belongs to us. What would those systems look like that would kind of flip the script there?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Historically, HR, we have been hoarders, right? We keep the data just in case. We think we own it. We keep it because we have to, somebody's going to sue us for some reason, or we have to justify, or we have to report on it to someone else, and so we keep the data forever. I see this. I see that changing. I see functionality in the systems and the architecture of the systems that really allow, and in the blockchain functionality, and that I think could be the answer. I know that's not, right here in all of our, but there is, my understanding is that might be, I see hopefully we see new systems that are all designed that let us control more of our data. One of the questions, though, that's I think is the challenging part, is what is my data? And that's what I think we're going to have to really wrestle with. Things like worked on one project where we were looking at all the breadcrumbs you leave when you're working in Microsoft Office, or your teams, who do I talk to? Is that my data? Like the fact that I am having this call with you today, Brent, is that data of yours and I, or does that belong to the organization? Is the fact that, I sent a message to somebody else, is that my data? Or is that employee monitoring? There's a lot of discussion around that. Ratings, right? Like I'm interviewing somebody and I make comments about, is this person a good fit for the job? Does that, like I say, Brent, Brent's not a good fit for the job because of XYZ. Is that his data? Or can I say, no, that's really my data? So there's a lot of things like that we have to work through as well, and hoping that as we get answers to these questions from probably mostly legislation and court cases and things, that then the systems will have to catch up with it as well. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, back in the old days, we would have a phone conversation over a landline, right? And I don't think that there was really any question that the Ma Bell or whatever, the AT&T or whatever it was, had owned our conversation. I mean, they were just providing the infrastructure over which our conversation, took, that facilitated our conversation happening, right? And yeah, there wasn't any caps. So with telephone, I mean, you want to get kind of granular here with telephone wires, right? There's no real data that was being, housed somewhere. So the technology that we use to communicate today, right? It's just a different type of technology. And so it lends itself to, well, okay, now, okay, I'm the vendor of whatever technologies that we've used to make our conversation happen, right?
Yeah.
And I have that data, maybe it's my data, right? But that's interesting, but that's a really tricky question because you would have to say that I think to argue that it's that vendor's property now, that you'd have to argue that there was no intrinsic privacy to one-on-one conversation taking place with the two people involved having a reasonable understanding that no one else heard it, that was never a legitimate conclusion for two people to have for the do you know what I mean? So it's kind of this is I mean, I'm sure there's some lawyers out there that are discussing. I'm not a lawyer, so we'll start going down this rabbit hole. But I mean, it's really interesting. To me, it just seems that there needs to, well, maybe it's just going to be a power thing. We're just going to have to decide. We're either going to decide that no, hey, your data's out there. It's once it's out there, forget it. Tough luck, pal. or, no, there is some some rules here. There's a sacrosanct sort of quality to our identifying information that's not saleable. I don't know. Not trying to get too philosophical.
No. And I think it's just so complex right now, right? If something you try to do in one country, one state, one province might be fine from a data perspective, but then the German Work Council is going to say, absolutely not. There's no way that you can do that. Or in the UK or in Brazil or other places. And so it's so complex. What we try to do is when working with clients is try to establish like what are your guidelines for global companies. What is the highest standard that you're going to set to, and set a standard that that we're going to consider requests for erasure. We're going to consider requests for information, even if it's not in a place where that would be okay. We're going to make sure we have some guiding principles and things that we're going to try to. Otherwise, you can just get so many different applications of it in different places, and then you have to look at how all of this data privacy is going to work with all the data analytics that some companies so much need. I mean, we need all this data analytics. And so we figure out our principles, and we look at those in addition to how are we going to manage the data analytics, and come up with our principles that we're going to, and that's kind of a great starting point for a company, is to say, how do we want to move forward, and what is our strategies? What are our principles? How are we going to operate? And then start putting the plans in place to get there. So.
And I love what you said about, kind of planning for these are my words, but I don't remember exactly how you put it, but it's sort of planning for the strictest circumstances, and so that the system can handle whatever the strictest circumstances are in your geographic footprint.
Yeah.
So the system can respond to that, and then it's going to be able to respond, to whatever, wherever there's an issue. And that's something that a lot of providers for various global needs do. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yeah. I'm just looking at the time and realizing that we've
so we could talk forever. We could geek out forever on this.
Yeah, I know. Love geeking out on HCM and data and high tech and all that. Brenda, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. Love it. Love geeking out with you, Brent.
Yeah, likewise. It's been a great conversation, and we'll have to have you on again soon.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.